Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Scott Huggins. I am the Scientific Services Veterinarian for Farmina Pet Foods for North America, and I'd like to welcome you to this seminar. If you guys don't know, Farmina is an Italian pet food company based in Naples, Italy. So, depending on your time zone, you have my complete permission to enjoy perhaps an espresso, a gelato, or if it's evening where you are, perhaps a fine Italian wine. Um, we chose this topic today because seeing as we are all preparing for Thanksgiving and the holiday season and the topic of what we're going to be eating, what could be a more appropriate time than to talk about the diet of our beloved pets and their gastrointestinal system? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And for a couple of reasons, this is another reason that we chose this topic. We have long known that diet can affect the overall health and quality of life, especially in humans. For example, we know that some diets can lead to kidney stones. We know that diet plays a role in diabetes. We've all heard of food allergies and how they can affect the skin and the gut. And we all know for quite some time that diet can affect cardiovascular disease and blood pressure. So if you start thinking about it, if there is one system in the body which really has an effect on all other types of systems, it is probably the gastrointestinal tract. And there's even more emerging research these days to show that the health of the gastrointestinal tract may play a role in lots of other diseases, and it generally plays a very, very important role in the overall health for not only us, but for our pets as well. So that sort of goes to my secondary title here to the presentation. We've all heard the Southern euphemism, if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. Or here I changed that to literally what we're talking about today. If the gut ain't happy, then the body's not happy. Before we dive into the heart of the presentation, though, I want you to picture this. Here's a dog named Tazzy. Just imagine that you've just adopted Tazzy from the shelter at this point. You take Tazzy home, you become very attached to her. She becomes your personal friend. She goes everywhere with you. But then over time, you start noticing that there are some changes in Tazzy, and Tazzy doesn't seem to be that healthy, and there seems to be something really wrong with Tazzy. For example, what happens if Tazzy were to look like this? Imagine what Tazzy feels like. I mean, she looks a little hunched. She looks like she's a little painful in the abdomen. She's got her head down. She seems a little depressed. Her skin is thickened. It probably smells. It has a particular odor to it. She's losing her hair. So number one, looking at Tazzy, we can tell that Tazzy's not very happy, and her quality of life is not that good. But as her pet owner, I'm sure you feel helpless if this were your dog. You know, you see the dog suffering, but what can I do? What can we do to help this dog? Maybe perhaps you've gone to the veterinarian and they've tried several different things, but nothing seems to be working. I definitely can, at this situation, feel for both the dog and the pet owner that we need to do something about the situation. So imagine you place Tazzy into a clinical trial for a specific reason, and then boom, 6 months later, look at Tazzy at this point. Her coat is shiny, it's grown back, she's gained weight, she looks much more healthier at this point. And it might surprise you to realize that, once again, she was placed into a clinical trial here at Farmina, but really the only thing that was done to Tazzy during these 6 months was a change in her diet. That's all. And if looking at this dramatic change and all we did was change the diet, doesn't that sort of lead us to believe that, hey, maybe there is something to this theory that the diet really does play a role not only in the health of the gastrointestinal system, but here we've got a perfect example of the diet affecting also the skin and the coat. So with today's agenda, what we're going to go through is we're going to talk about the brief anatomy of the gastrointestinal system, what its functions are. We're going to talk about something called the microbiota or the microbiome or the gut flora. We're going to go over the main gastrointestinal diseases. We can't hit all of them, but we're going to hit the most common ones and which ones you can look out for at home. You know, a quick section on how to manage vomiting and diarrhea at home if your dog or cat has vomiting or diarrhea. We're going to go over some feeding tips and tricks as well. And then we're going to end up by talking about some new research on the diet and gut health as well, too. As we dive into the gastrointestinal system, it is important to sort of look at the evolution of dogs and cats over time and how that has changed their GI tract. Contrary to popular belief, dogs are not descendants of wolves, but dogs and wolves have descended from a common ancestor tens of thousands of years in the past. So it always makes me a little nervous when I see a wolf on the bag of dog food, because once again, dogs are not wolves, wolves are not dogs, and their gastrointestinal systems are different because of these differences. This common ancestor of both the dogs and wolves used to be a hunter. It preyed on animals, injured animals. But over time, they determined, hey, these human folks, they leave an awful lot of trash and they leave a lot of food around. Maybe if I hang around these humans, I'll have a good source of food. And this close contact with humans then evolved into, hey, let's adopt these pets, let's adopt these dogs and make them our companions, whether social companions, our companions for protection, or to help us hunt. And so over time, as we have changed the diet of dogs over thousands and thousands of years, we've actually altered their GI tract, and they are no longer true carnivores. They're what we call adapted carnivores, or you may hear the term omnivore as well too. Their GI tract has sort of been developed so that they can get many, many different types of food and not just meat. On the other side of things, though, is cats are actually a lot more similar to their ancestors than dogs are. Cats are descendants of Felis sylvestris. I always wonder if that's where they get the name Sylvester the cat, if you remember those old Looney Tune cartoons. But Felis sylvestris was the ancestor of the modern day cat. And once again, Felis sylvestris was a hunter, hunted birds, small reptiles, and wild rodents. As we started to domesticate cats, the main function of cats were to guard barns, to guard houses, to rid ourselves of mice and vermin. So over time, we didn't find the need to change the diet of cats. In fact, it was beneficial that they stayed with their diet, original diet of these small prey, so that they could still provide a benefit to us. So bottom line is cats are much more like their ancestors than dogs are. There are specific characteristics of the mouths of carnivores that, once again, can identify them as carnivores as opposed to herbivores like cows and horses and even us. First of all, they have powerful mandibular muscles. These muscles are probably the strongest muscles in a dog's body. Your your mandibular muscles are also one of the most powerful muscles in your body, but it's even more pronounced 10 times in a dog. Anyone that's bitten by a dog or a cat would probably attest to how powerful these muscles are. And these are really designed to catch and to hold the prey. Dogs also have these really pronounced canine teeth, these sharp, pointy teeth that you see in the front, and that's really there to hold the prey in the mouth to make it much more difficult for them to escape. The sharp, pointed teeth are also there to help tear up the meat into smaller pieces. So that's very important for the carnivores. They also have a very wide opening of their mouths. If you can sort of compare the mouth opening of a dog to ourselves, you can see how much bigger the mouth opening is for the dog. Another interesting difference between carnivores and other types of mammals is that there is a specific enzyme in your saliva called amylase. And the purpose of amylase is to start digesting carbohydrates in the mouth. Since carnivores very rarely eat carbohydrates, they don't have a need for amylase, so they don't have that much in their mouths. Dogs do have some amylase in their salivary glands, but cats have virtually nothing. If you ever eat a small piece of bread or a cracker and you keep it in your mouth, gradually over a minute or two, you'll see that piece of bread starts to dissolve and goes away. That's the amylase in your saliva dissolving the carbohydrates in the bread or the crackers. Another interesting difference between carnivores and other breeds is the number of taste buds. And there is a specific reason why I'm bringing this up. Humans have about 20,000 taste buds, and we've got very specialized taste buds for sweet and sour and spicy and salty, whereas dogs only have about 1,700 taste buds, and cats only have about 500. The reason behind this is that most carnivores don't have a very varied type of a diet. They don't need to taste the difference between a lot of different things. So they have a very minute or a limited number of taste buds. In fact, dogs and cats probably don't taste sweetness. So, good for them. They don't crave chocolate and cake and pies and stuff like that we do. Herbivores like cows have 30,000, about 25,000 taste buds. Pigs have 14,000. Herbivores need to be able to taste between toxins or pollutants in their diets and also spoiled roughage and things like that. So they are much more sensitive to that. The reason I bring this up is that we often anthropomorphize, or however you say that word. Dogs and cats don't need an awful lot of variety in their food. Sometimes we feel bad that they seem to be eating the same thing every day. But once again, your cat can't tell the difference between a turkey and a chicken and a quail and a duck. So they really don't need an awful lot of variety. Dogs and cats get more from the smell of their food than they do the taste of it. They actually have a gland on the roof of their mouth called the vomeronasal gland, which is a mixture between taste and smell. So once again, taste is much more, smell is a much more attraction for dogs and cats than the actual taste is. That's also one of the reasons dogs like to put things in their mouth. It's a way for them to smell it. Now, we talked about the mouth. The next part of the gastrointestinal tract is the stomach. And the stomach's main function is to take the food that we eat and to break it down into a liquid form. So we bite and chew and make the food we eat into smaller pieces, but we need to get it into a liquid form. So the muscular contractions of the stomach break down the food, and the hydrochloric acid in the stomach also breaks it down into a liquid form that's called chyme, chyme. And it needs to be in this liquid form for it to enter the small intestine for the next phase of the process. Once this liquid gets into the small intestine, this is where most of the digestion and absorption occurs. Digestion is basically taking this liquid food and breaking it down into smaller and smaller molecules. So these molecules are small enough that they can pass through the epithelial cells of the small intestine into the bloodstream, where they can be distributed throughout the rest of the body. And finally, what undigested food is left over are the water that's in the diet that we eat reaches the large intestine. And here the large intestine does an awful lot in maintaining our water balance. If we're dehydrated, it takes more water in. If we're too hydrated, it'll let more water go into the digestive tract to sort of maintain that balance of water and electrolytes. So in summary, the main purposes of the gastrointestinal system, once again, is the digestion of food, breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces until it gets to the molecular level. Then we've got the absorption of these molecules through the epithelium of the small intestine into the bloodstream. The GI tract also excretes waste product, undigested food, and other waste products through the liver. It's also very important in water and electrolyte regulation. And it's also very important for the immune system. Almost 70% of your immune system is in the GI tract, where it really plays a significant factor in your body's immune system. It helps protect a barrier against harmful pathogens in the things that we eat and the things that we drink. So once again, the immune system is a very important role of the gastrointestinal system as well. Next, we're going to talk about our friends, the microbiota. Now, this may be a new term for many of you. I think what bacteriologists like to do when they're bored is just come up with new names for things. You may have heard the term microbiome or microflora or gut flora. All of these refer to the same thing, but the new trending term that you'll see in most research papers these days is something called the microbiota. And what this represents is the trillions and trillions of microorganisms such as bacteria, yeast, and fungi, which live inside us and outside of us. So in our gut, on our skin, nose, ears, etc. It's probably making you guys all itchy right now. But this microbiota is very important. It's a truly symbiotic relationship. We provide them with protection. We provide them with a place to live. We provide them with food, and they do an awful lot for us as well. Now, once again, the microbiota are these trillions of organisms that live in and on you. And in fact, it's sort of interesting to know that there's 10 times the number of microorganisms in your body right now than there are actually human cells. So I don't want to keep anyone up late tonight having the existential crisis trying to determine if they're human or not. But it sort of begs the question, how can you claim to be human if only 1 out of the 10 cells in your body are actually human cells? You're in effect, you're not a human, you're an ecosystem of all these organisms that depend on you for survival. In ecology, there is a concept called biodiversity. And biodiversity is a concept that says that the more species that live in an ecosystem, the stronger that ecosystem is and the more resistant it is to diseases, changes in environment, pollutions, invasive species. In a grand sense, you can sort of think the Amazon rainforest is very biodiverse. It's got an awful lot of plants and animals that live in the Amazon rainforest. It's much more biodiverse than the Antarctic. So in theory, the species in the Amazon rainforest are going to be much more resistant to changes in temperature, drought, pollution, pathogens. It's going to be much more difficult to make a species extinct in a biodiverse ecosystem like the Amazon rainforest than it would be in the Antarctic, which doesn't have much biodiversity. This concept also applies to our own microbiota. The running theory is that the more diverse our microbiota is, the more resistance the GI tract is going to be to changes, and it's going to be less likely to get upset by very many different things. So once again, we want our microbiota to be very diverse. This microbiota also, which I touched on this earlier, it's a symbiotic relationship. We provide them with an awful lot of place to live and food, and they support us by helping us by providing us vitamins and minerals, helping us digest our food, and even help stimulating our immune system. So the health impact of these guys is actually quite significant. So more and more research these days is looking at the role the microbiota plays. And the more we do research, the more we find it is related to many, many, many different things that we're researching. So once again, in summary, the microbiota assists with digestion, helps break down our food. It helps provides us with vitamins and minerals. There's certain bacteria in our colon that produce vitamin K. Some produce vitamin D. It's very important for the immune system. The bacteria in the microbiota help train our immune system to recognize harmful pathogens and to mount an effective defense against them. It's sort of trying to help train our immune system to recognize what's normal and should be ignored, and what's abnormal, which needs to kick in the immune system to fight off. And even these days, I mentioned, I touched on this earlier, is that we're even finding that the microbiota is very important for even your emotional and mental health well-being. There's something called the gut-brain axis. There's a direct connection between the brain and the gut. And you probably heard the phrase, I have a gut feeling about that. And that may actually come from this gut-brain axis. It may actually be a truth to a gut feeling. But we're finding an awful lot of the microbiota can affect or change due to things like anxiety or depression. And even there are certain things like Parkinson's disease that change the microbiota. So the question is always, which came first? Did the microbiota change first to lead to Parkinson's or vice versa? So once again, I experience this with a lot of veterinary behaviorists who will, surprisingly enough, place a lot of their dogs and cats that come to them with behavioral problems, such as separation anxiety, noise phobias. They'll place them on probiotics, which may not be expected at the surface, but once you think about that gut-brain axis, it actually make more sense. Now, there is a difference between the microbiota in humans and those in dogs and cats. Dogs and cats have a much shortened intestinal tract than humans do. A dog, it's about 2 to 6 meters, depending on the breed. A cat, it's usually less than 2 meters. And the shorter the GI tract, because basically carnivores don't eat an awful lot of variety of food, so their digestive process is a lot simpler than, say, it is for a horse or a cow. Cows have 4 stomachs. Horses have miles and miles of intestines, it seems like. But so they have a shortened GI tract, and they also have less bacteria. They have a less diverse microbiota than humans do. And if biodiversity is important, what does it mean if their microbiota is less diverse? That means they're going to be much more sensitive to changes. And this is why pets can be very sensitive to diet changes. They're not typically used to eating Chinese one day and Mexican the next. So since their microbiota is less diverse, they seem to be much more sensitive to diet transitions. So if you ever have to change your pet's diet, I'd really recommend that you consult with your Hollywood Feed sales associate. They're trained to help you do this process of transitioning. We'll touch on it a little bit later, but Farmina also has a Genius app that you can download, which will sort of give you an idea of how to transition from one food to another. There are a lot of things that can affect the microbiota. Generally, diet is one of the most common things that can affect the composition and the biodiversity of the microbiota. And typically, most of the research is on the things that can negatively affect the microbiota. The Western diet, for some reason in the Western world, our microbiome is less diverse than it is in the rest of the world, where people eat more whole food, fruits and vegetables. The theory is all these microprocessed foods like microwave pizza and potato chips and hamburgers and macaroni and cheese have an adverse effect on our microbiota. It makes it much less diverse. So diet can have a beneficial effect on the microbiota, and it can also have a detrimental effect on the microbiota. Antibiotics can affect the microbiota. Every time you take an antibiotic, it's going to kill off some of the good bacteria. So we have to be very careful and judicious with our use of antibiotics. Same thing with antibacterial soaps and hand washes. This is something that can all affect the microbiota, and maybe once again a reason why in the Western world we have a less diverse microbiota than the rest of the world, because of the prevalence of antibiotics and antibacterial soaps. I do know a lot of veterinarians that actually prescribe probiotics when they prescribe antibiotics for dogs and cats to try to to prevent some of these effects. Just like everything, genetics can have an effect on the microbiota. The environment, such as pollutions or toxins, can have an effect on the microbiota. And unfortunately, as we age, our microbiota typically becomes less diverse, and certain diseases can also affect the microbiota as well too. So there's no way for me to discuss all the gastrointestinal diseases, so I'm trying to sort of stay at the most common things that can happen with the gastrointestinal tract, and highlight the most common things that you might see. And the bottom line here is that vomiting and diarrhea and clinical signs of gastrointestinal diseases is probably one of the most, if not the most common reasons that pets come to the veterinarian. And this is the reasons behind this is that, you can see vomiting and diarrhea, whereas you can't necessarily tell if your dog has heartworms, your cat has FIV, or heart disease. Pet owners can blatantly and obviously see vomiting and diarrhea, and it's very distressing to see your pet go through these episodes, especially if they are chronic or recurring. And it's also very inconvenient for pets to have to clean up afterwards. So I know everyone here loves their dogs and cats to pieces, but unfortunately there are some pet owners that see their pets as inconveniences. So if they do behavior such as vomiting and diarrhea, it may affect the ability of that pet to stay in the home. So these are among the reasons why GI disorders are among the most common things seen by a veterinarian. There are a lot of things that can affect the GI tract, and this is why it's so difficult to diagnose what's going on. Vomiting and diarrhea is a clinical sign. It's not really a problem of itself. It is caused by something else. And the challenge for all of us, pet owners and veterinarians, is to try to figure out what is the cause of the vomiting and diarrhea. So we have to be very methodical and deliberate in our approach. We have to rule out infections such as parvo, parasitic infections like roundworms or tapeworms. We need to make sure that that's not going on. Other diseases such as diabetes or thyroid problems or adrenal gland problems and diabetes can present with vomiting and diarrhea. So we have to make sure, is there something else going on above and beyond the vomiting and diarrhea and the GI problems? Toxins such as plants and chemicals and even medications can lead to severe GI distress. This is a big one. We've all heard of stress diarrhea. One of the major problems with boarding your pet or going to the veterinarian or even going on vacation are changes in the household, a new baby arriving, moving can lead to stress diarrhea. We talked about that gut-brain axis earlier. If your brain is not happy, it can also affect your gut. So the theory is stress and anxiety can affect the gut as well too and lead to issues. Medications can lead to diarrhea, especially antibiotics. Genetics, certain genetic diseases can occur in certain breeds of dogs. As we get older, once again, our GI tract is going to be much more susceptible to changes and certain pathologies. And dietary factors can have a big importance about gastrointestinal disease. None of that is probably very surprising. The most common clinical signs that you will see with GI diseases, number one is probably vomiting. It is important to distinguish between vomiting and something called regurgitation. Vomiting is the actual stomach contents being proactively through abdominal contractions coming back up. Regurgitation is more of an esophageal problem where the food doesn't even reach the stomach. Either the muscles of the esophagus aren't strong enough to push the food into the stomach, or there could be an obstruction in the chest, like an enlarged heart, that could prevent food from traveling down the esophagus. Regurgitation usually comes immediately after eating, and it looks like undigested food. And it can even have a little tube shape, just like the esophagus. We often think about diarrhea as a clinical sign of GI issues, but don't forget constipation, which is the opposite when it's difficult to go or to defecate. Abdominal pain can be seen with gastrointestinal issues. They have a very sensitive stomach if you pet or try to tap their stomach. There could be a change in appetite. There could be weight loss and a decreased desire to eat, but there can also be some conditions which can actually make them have an increased appetite. So when you're considering a pet with vomiting or diarrhea and you're talking to the veterinarian, this is something to sort of keep an eye on. Is the dog or cat eating less, or is it eating more? Also look for any signs of blood or mucus in the feces. These could be a sign that something more serious could be going on. So this is something that you definitely want to keep an eye out for when you're noticing a dog or cat with GI issues. Working our way through the GI tract, one of the most common causes of GI issues is actually the mouth. We get the benefit of brushing our teeth several times a day, and anyone that tries to brush their dogs or their cat's teeth several times a day would probably be first to admit that it's not the easiest thing to do. It's usually easier if you train your puppies and kittens to accept having their teeth brushed when they're young, but for an older pet, it can be difficult. So in this situation, it's often recommended to at least have some type of dry food in the diet, if possible, to help scrape some of that tartar or plaque off the teeth. The reason I bring this up is one of the first things as a veterinarian we're going to look at if a dog or cat is not eating is we're going to look at the mouth first. Is there some oral pain going on in there? I had a dog with a stick trapped right on the upper palate of the mouth. What do the teeth look like? Inappetence or not eating is one of the main signs of painful teeth. So there's definitely something we're going to try to rule out first. Now, next, we got probably the most diagnosed gastrointestinal disorder, and it's a pretty vague term. You may hear the terms gastritis, gastroenteritis, or enteritis. The suffix itis basically means inflammation of whatever precedes it. So gastritis is inflammation of the stomach. Gastro refers to the stomach. Enteritis is inflammation of the small intestine. And gastroenteritis is inflammation of both. And this is, once again, a very non-specific diagnosis. There are a lot of things that can lead to this. And once again, as a veterinarian, we're going to have to rule out parasitic causes, infectious causes. Is it a toxin? Is it a drug? Is it the diet? But this can be a very frustrating for both the veterinarian and the pet owner because it is a non-specific diagnosis and we still need to do additional diagnostics to try to see what's going on, what's the underlying cause. Another thing that can affect the stomach, which is much more life-threatening, is something called GDV, or gastric dilatation volvulus. It's often commonly called bloat. This most commonly occurs in large breed dogs, thick-chested dogs like Great Danes, Afghan hounds, where the stomach gets enlarged after eating, and if there's exercise or they lay down the wrong way, basically the stomach can turn on itself, and you can imagine that's an emergency situation. One of the most stressful cases I saw in private practice was a 26-pound Cocker Spaniel with GDV, and it was so stressful because no one would believe me that it was GDV because it was a small dog. And everyone I was reaching out to help kept on trying to dissuade me from the diagnosis when I had the radiographs in front of me and I knew what was going on. So what you need to do here is avoid really intense physical activity close to meals, especially with those large breed dogs. Another thing that's very common is foreign body ingestion. We talked about how dogs have that vomeronasal gland. So dogs like to put things in their mouth because that's a way that they smell the things that they're investigating. So if you're going to put something in their mouth, there's a chance you're going to swallow it. So you need to make sure that if you have any toys or chews for your pet, that they're the appropriate size, that they can't be swallowed. Sometimes you have to even take aggressive measures. I had a client that had a 12-pound dachshund, and every time they took the dog for a walk, it would eat rocks and sticks. So they had to put this muzzle, this cage muzzle on this little 12-pound dachshund, and it sort of looked like Hannibal Lecter as a dachshund. So it was this little tiny dog, but the muzzle made it look really aggressive. So it was really a contradiction. And it was actually sort of funny that this poor little 12-pound dachshund that was the nicest thing, the sweetest dog in the world, looked so strange with this cage muzzle. So sometimes you do have to take some pretty drastic measures to prevent foreign body ingestion. Another thing that can happen to the stomach are gastric ulcers, just like in people. Stress can cause gastric ulcers. And same thing in people. One of the most common causes of gastric ulcers are chronic uses of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, things like aspirin, carprofen, Rimadyl, Previcox. If your dog or cat is on any of these long-term, the veterinarian is definitely going to keep an eye out and want to monitor for any chance of any gastric ulcers. Moving down to the intestines, there's a host of disorders called malabsorption disorders. In these situations, there's a problem with the body's absorption of the nutrients. We've gotten the food digested into small enough pieces to go through the epithelium of the small intestine, the bloodstream, but for some reason, that's not happening. It could be caused by a thickening of the intestinal lining due to either chronic inflammation or cancer, or it could be problems with the pancreas. So there are some situations where the dog or cat or the person is just not absorbing the nutrients the way we should, and this leads to some malabsorptive disorders. Typically, these dogs and cats are very hungry. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but since they're eating, but they're not absorbing their food adequately, and basically they are starving, even though they're eating. So if you have a dog or cat with diarrhea, loose stools, and a voracious appetite, malabsorption disorders is definitely something to look at. This, I think, is a very important slide because, once again, vomiting, diarrhea, GI disorders are very common. But if you're sitting at home on a Friday night and your dog has diarrhea or vomiting, it's always a difficult question. Do I need to go to the vet? Do I need to go to the emergency clinic? What do I need to do? And not that I have a crystal ball, but here's a couple tips to keep in mind when you're trying to determine if you need to go to the vet or not. Is it chronic? Is the diarrhea chronic? Is there soft stools chronic? Is it lasting more than, say, 2 or 3 days? If so, that is something that probably needs to be seen. Do you see blood or mucus in the feces? That would be an indication that you need to go to the veterinarian. Is it vomiting and diarrhea at the same time? These are basically affecting 2 different sections of the GI tract. So if they're happening at the same time, there's something that's affecting multiple parts of the GI tract. So usually that needs to be seen. A change in appetite, like we discussed earlier, if their appetite increases or if their appetite decreases. We don't want this to go on for very long. If you feel like your pet is painful in the abdomen, this is, once again, a warning sign that they do need to be seen by a veterinarian sooner than later. If you've got a puppy, if you've got an older pet, or if you've got a pet with other conditions like thyroid problems or diabetes, they're going to be more sensitive to GI issues. So you want to be much more hypervigilant with puppies and seniors and be more conservative and more likely to go to the vet with these folks than you would with a middle-aged pet. If there's any signs of dehydration or lethargy, one way you can check for dehydration is to check the gums and see if they're pale or tacky or dry, or the skin seems to tint when you sort of pinch it. These are signs of dehydration and usually means that the pet needs to be on intravenous fluids. So that is something that needs to be seen by a veterinarian. The same thing with weight loss. If you have a pet with GI-ish clinical signs and they're losing weight, it does need to be seen by a veterinarian. What can you do at home if you got a pet with vomiting and diarrhea? And I think the first thing you can do is actually come up with an accurate description of what's going on with the feces to describe it to a veterinarian. And what the veterinarians have done is we've come up with this 7-point scale that tries to be a little bit consistent in describing what the feces looks like. So for example, a 1 on the 7-point scale is really hard lumps of stool that are really hard for the pet to pass. It's a sign of constipation. That would be a 1. A 2 would be sort of sausage-shaped, lumpy, but they're still fairly dry and hard to pass, still a sign of constipation. Then you get improvement in the stool with the number 3. They're like a sausage and they have some cracks on the surface. This is usually fairly normal, as is a number 4. sausage that is a little bit softer, but is a little bit smoother. Isn't this something fun to talk about? Hopefully you're not eating right now. Number 5, we're getting closer to diarrhea here. We're getting more, instead of a continuous sausage-like shape, we're getting multiple blobs. And then number 6, you're getting more of a cow patty type of a situation. And then number 7, you've got this watery diarrhea that is not solid at all. So you can help your veterinarian by sort of coming up with this, using this 7-point scale to sort of describe what the feces looks like, not only when you come in, but also as you're treating and managing the situation. Other things to look for in the stool are color changes. If you see the stool is yellowish or really greasy, that could be a sign of a malabsorption disorder. So there's something that does need to be seen by a veterinarian. Same thing with blood in the stool, especially dark red, black stool. Bright red blood in the stool usually means that there's some bleeding towards the end of the GI tract, usually around the anus or the rectum. It could be a sign of straining. It could be a sign of some inflammation back there. Dark red blood, also called melena, is usually a sign of blood higher up in the GI tract, like the stomach or the small intestine, where normally this should not happen. So if you see a dark red, black stool, that is something that does need to be seen by a veterinarian very quickly. So once again, keep an eye on yellowish stools or blood in the stool. If you're asked to bring a stool sample, it's best to try to do it within 24 hours of coming to the vet. You just try to get the least possible contamination without kitty litter or grass or dirt in it. And you can put it in a suitable container and refrigerate it if needed. And as a veterinarian, I much prefer a client to bring a stool sample than for me to have to go get one myself, because that can be very challenging. When you bring a stool sample in, the vet's going to look for any presence of parasites, ideally, which can be a serious problems. They can be tapeworms, roundworms, protozoa like coccidia and giardia. There may be more complicated tests that will be done on the stool samples to look at digestive issues and absorption issues. But these are some of the things that a veterinarian will look for in a stool sample. Regular stool samples are very important because some of these parasites, such as roundworms, can be transmitted to people too. So you want to make sure that you are at least regularly checking a stool sample to make sure there's no diseases that you can catch from your pet. So quick summary, if you got vomiting or diarrhea at home, monitor your pet. Keep a close note of what the stool looks like, how often they're defecating, what it looks like, are there changes in colors. Avoid irritants such as toxins, chemicals, or plants. Make sure you got plenty, provide access to water. One of the dangers of vomiting and diarrhea is getting dehydrated, so you want to make sure that they have access to water. If you're finding your pet doesn't want to drink water, especially dogs, sometimes you can use ice cubes. For some reason, dogs really like ice cubes, and that's a way to sort of increase their water intake. Dietary adjustment may be necessary. Your vet may switch your pet to a specific diet. They may recommend to feed smaller and more frequent meals to help with certain GI issues. And, once again, if you see any of the signs we talked about before, feel free to consult your veterinarian. A couple feeding tips and tricks. The biggest question is, what the heck do I feed my dog or my cat? And that is a question that is very difficult to answer because there's not one set of things that you can look at. One thing you can do, as I said, I do recommend that you talk to your Hollywood feed sales associate, because they can really help you in this situation. Some of the things to consider when you're looking at a pet food is the digestibility of the nutrients. What form are these nutrients? What form is the proteins, the carbohydrates, the fats? Are these easily digestible? Are they byproducts? Are they real chicken? Are they eggs? What's going on with the digestibility of the nutrients in this diet? What are the compositions? What are the carbohydrates they use? What are the proteins that they use? One cool thing about food is usually they have the energy content on the packages, so you can actually calculate how much you should be feeding per day and what the energy requirements are for that pet. If you ever do need to transition your pet, that is something that you need to do gradually, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Well, actually, we're going to talk about that now. If you're transitioning food, you want to do this gradually over several days. Start off with mostly old food and with just a little bit of the new food. And then as you can see over the next every 3 days, we increase the amount of new food so that by day 10 or so, we're at the 100% new food. Once again, the microbiota of dogs and cats is less diverse. It is more prone to disruption of food changes. Is it always going to happen? No, but they're just more prone for this to happen. How often should I feed my pets? That's a great question. And it depends an awful lot on your individual pets. Ideally, it is best to split it up 2 to 3 times a day. Dogs can often gorge themselves. In a dog's mind, if since they're scavengers, if the food's there, they need to eat it now because it may not be there tomorrow. So they typically will eat if there's an opportunity available for them to eat. So by giving them free rein, they may overindulge. Cats don't usually eat very many meat an awful lot at one time. They're used to eating a mouse here, a bird there. They don't typically have a big Thanksgiving turkey all at once. How many of you guys have a cat that wakes you up vociferously in the morning, demanding that you feed them? You get up, you put the food down there and eat like 2 or 3 bites and they're done. That's a cat for you. They don't eat much at one point. As we talked about earlier, avoid intense physical activity after a meal to avoid GDV or bloat. And sometimes adding a meal may actually help with certain conditions like soft stools. So once again, questions about how often to feed my pet, feel free to consult your Hollywood Feed sales associate. The bowl, avoid conflicts. Make sure there's some issues with the bowl. Don't try to have any conflicts associated with the food. Don't take the food away while the pet is eating. That may encourage them to eat more quickly. Don't stick your hands in it. It's going to change the smell of it. Do not require them to sit before it. Food can be used as a reward, but it should not always be a reward. And be sure to remove the bowl immediately after the meal. It's better to take the food up, and once again, don't free rent. If you have the food out there all day, sometimes it's hard to tell if they're eating. Is that food from today or is that food from yesterday? If you take up the food after 20 minutes, you can tell if your pet is eating or not. And it also puts them on a schedule. And dogs and cats do like to have schedules. So in this situation, feeding several times a day, don't cause any conflicts around the bowl, and take it up after 20 minutes. One thing that you often forget is the cleaning of the bowls. I'll admit that I fall prey to this. I don't often do this as often as I should. But cleaning the bowl with water after each meal, use a detergent every 2 to 3 days. Rancid food can change the smell of the diet, so you want to be the bowls to be as odorless as possible. Be sure to place the bowls in a suitable place. Don't put them in a central place where there's an awful lot of activity and a lot of busyness. This can cause dogs stress with their food is constantly, people are constantly going by their food. They're afraid that someone's going to steal their food. So you may have a dog barking at people passing by their food, or they don't rest very well because they're stressed that their food is out in a central place, and especially avoid entries and exits. So both dogs and cats like a very calm, quiet place to be fed away from the busyness of the household. Should you feed dry or should you feed wet? Both of them have their benefits. Both of them have their drawbacks. And once again, feel free to consult your Hollywood Feed sales associate or the Farmina app. Some of the advantages to dry food is it's convenient. It's easy to store. It helps with the dental health. It's very cost effective. It's less expensive. And you can control the portions much more easier than you can with the wet food. Wet food increases the hydration. It's a way to increase water intake. That's usually more palatable because it smells better. Has a strong smell to it, and it's easier to eat for those senior pets or those that may have teeth problems. So the choice, it depends on you and your pet's individual needs. And once again, be sure to consult your Hollywood Feed sales associate for more information. And by managing your pet's nutrition very closely, it's an awful lot of benefits for you and your pet. Benefits for your pet, feeding correctly is going to maintain a proper body condition, a balance between muscle and fat. We're going to improve the consistency of the stool so that we're not having issues with diarrhea or straining or constipation. It may help prevent an awful lot of these diseases that are associated with diet issues. We're going to improve the biodiversity of our gut microbiota of your pet, and you're going to boost the quality of life and longevity. There's actually studies to show that if we feed accurately and you prevent obesity, your pets can live 2 to 3 years longer if we make sure we maintain the proper weight on these pets. For you as a family, it's an opportunity for you to be a partner with your veterinarian and prevent potential issues. Prevention is always much better than the treatment. We can simplify pet care dynamics at home, and instead of household homemade diets and things like that, a proper diet can help simplify that. We can minimize pet health conditions and save you money in the long run and provide you with more time with your pet over the years. Now, real quickly, I'm going to finish up with some new research that has been done by Farmina. And I think this is one thing that I want to, it really distinguishes Farmina from other companies because research is one of our core foundations. We talk about Farmina as a good blend of science and nature. We are always collaborating with leading universities around the world and researchers worldwide, both in Italy, in Serbia, and even in the United States. We're working with a lot of universities to continue our research. And one of our core values with research is the cruelty-free research that we do. We always use client-owned animals that can stay at home in a less stressful environment. We're not going to use any controls or placebos where it will delay treatment or cause suffering or pain. And we do not use any type of animal research that requires an animal to be euthanized at the end. So cruelty-free research is one of our tenets, and science is one of our major tenets as a company. Research has been showing that there's an awful lot of diseases that are caused by chronic inflammation in the body. And there are certain types of food that can actually increase inflammation in the body. We talked about this earlier. These processed diets and microwave pizza and macaroni and cheese seem to increase inflammation in the body. And there are certain diseases like inflammatory bowel disease or allergies, which are a sequela to chronic inflammation. Some diets that are high in fruit, vegetables, fish, and nuts and legumes, and complex starches and sugars actually have positive reducing inflammatory effects in the body. So there's an awful lot of research into the effects that diet can have on the body, and we're finding that the ingredients are really crucial with the benefits that these diets are having. You want really high quality ingredients. Perhaps we don't need all these byproducts and preservatives and GMOs and artificial flavors and artificial colors. So ingredients are really crucial to these type of diets that are beneficial to the body. So we're really realizing that quality of the pet's food is really a big factor that often has been ignored for quite a long time. Here are a couple of studies that have been done by Dr. Noli. She's a dermatologist in Italy. And I'm going to try to just sort of give you a brief idea of these studies. I'm not going to go too deep into them, but these studies and the one that comes after it that I'm going to show you is really showing what a very simple, limited ingredient diet can do to a lot of different diseases in the body. In these studies that Dr. Noli did, we fed these dogs and cats one of our products called HB Derma. And basic HB Derma contains a protein, which is hydrolyzed fish. It contains a carbohydrate, which is the rice starch, and it also has a fat, which is the fish oil. So it basically has three main ingredients. It doesn't have byproducts. It doesn't have preservatives. It doesn't have artificial colors, flavorings. And the first study that she looked at with this diet was that she looked at dogs and cats with food allergies. And the first part of the study demonstrated that dogs and cats with food allergies had an altered microbiota in their gut, which wasn't too surprising. But what was interesting is after being fed this simple diet, limited ingredient diet, it actually improved the microbiota after 2 months. So it was more biodiverse. So this is showing that a simple limited ingredient diet can affect the microbiota. Secondly, she looked at using this product in dogs and cats with food allergies, number one, to see if we could diagnose food allergies in these dogs and cats. And the results of the study were yes, that the HB Derm was very useful in diagnosing dogs with food allergies. But there were several dogs and cats in this study that came into the study, but the veterinarian and the owner thought they had food allergies, but it turned out that they didn't have food allergies, but there was something in this limited ingredient diet that caused their itchiness to resolve and their skin condition to improve that was separate from the food allergies. So once again, the theory is these limited ingredients, high quality diets can have a significant effect, not only with dogs and cats with food allergies, but those that seem to have food allergies. And finally, here's one study that's also done at the University of Cornell. And this study was using the HB Derma, the limited ingredient diet for dogs with chronic enteropathy or inflammatory bowel disease. And this was a study that Taz was in earlier. And this study also had very surprising results in that feeding these limited ingredient diets to these dogs with inflammatory bowel disease, which can often be very, very difficult to manage. All of these dogs were fed one of 3 Farmina limited ingredient diets, and all of the dogs in this study responded to at least 1 or 2 of these diets. And the only thing that was changed in the study was the food that they were being fed. So all of these dogs in a very complicated disease like inflammatory bowel disease responded to a limited ingredient, high quality ingredient product like HP Derma, which was surprising. And once again, that was a study that Taz was in. Here's another dog that was in the study. His name is Argos. Here's before the trial. This sort of looking down on him. This is his waist right here. And you can see how thin Argos is at the start of the trial. And here he was just 6 weeks later. Once again, the only thing that was changed was the diet. And look how much weight Argos has regained at this point. And once again, remember Tazzy. Tazzy was enrolled in this study, not for skin problems, but for chronic diarrhea. And once again, just by changing the diet, these are the results that we saw after 6 months. So to wrap things up and talk about the Farmina diets, not all these Farmina diets were used in these studies, but all of our Farmina diets have this same philosophy that we're going to use limited ingredients. Why use 5 or 6 different protein sources when we can just rely on 1 or 2? Make sure that we have a carbohydrate, we've got a protein, we've got a fish oil, but don't try to make it much more complicated than that. Our products have low glycemic index starches like spelt and oats or sweet potatoes, which help promote that sense of fullness for longer. It makes the metabolism of these carbohydrates much slower, so you don't get such, for example, a sugar high like you would with a simple sugar like sugar. All of our products are GMO free, no byproducts, so no chicken byproducts, no beef byproducts. These are real ingredients from real chickens and pigs and other species. The ingredients are highly digestible, and we also include prebiotics, which is a food source for those microbiota. Make sure they have enough to eat. We also have omega-3 fatty acids, which helps support the skin, the coat, and the joints. And we use natural antioxidants as opposed to artificial ones. So once again, we're trying to make a very simple diet that doesn't have an awful lot of unnecessary added things, like was used in these studies. Here's a selection of the Farmina diets. The Vet Life products are available through your veterinarian, but the N&D products, here's a sample of what is available at Hollywood Feeds. And I will wrap up with a couple key points. As we talked about, dogs and cats are not humans. Their gastrointestinal tracts are different, and these differences are significant in what they need to eat and some of the conditions and and disorders that they may have. GI disorders are the most common complaint seen by veterinarians, so hopefully we gave you some tips on how to prevent some of these GI issues and what to do at home. Proper diet and feeding can really reduce the prevalence of GI issues. Choosing the right diet and feeding a specific way by recommendations can reduce the causes of GI issues. And research shows that these limited ingredient diets without unnecessary ingredients can really promote GI health. And as you can see with Taz and with Argos, it can have an effect on many more other parts of the body. With that, since we're Italian, I'll say grazie. Hang on here, guys, and we will have a live question and answer section briefly. So gather up all your questions. I hope you guys learned something today, and please join us for the questions and answers, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thank you very much.